Welcome, everyone. Come on in, get settled. As you're entering, I'm going to ask folks to drop their name and their organization in the chat so we can see who all's here. And we'll give it a minute to let folks filter in. I see some new folks and some I don't know, old folks, some friends that we've known for a minute. Welcome, everyone. As folks are coming in, if you could drop your name and your organization in the chat, just so we can see who all's here. And we'll get started in a minute. We're just going to give people a chance to find their links. I am always that person digging through my email at the last minute, trying to find the link for the webinar that I've signed up for. Welcome, everyone. We will get started in a minute. We're just going to give people a chance to find their links and join us. If you haven't already done it, please drop your name and your organization in the chat. Welcome, folks. We still have a stream of people coming in. I'm going to give it a minute and another minute to let people get signed in. Go ahead and drop your name and organization in the chat. Looks like a great group from all around the country. It's always exciting. Hi, Pete. Feel like the woman from Romper Room, if anyone remembers Romper Room. I see Karen and I see Julia and I see Tom. Great. Well, we will go ahead and get started. Please, if you've come in since I last announced it, go ahead and drop your name and your organization in the chat. It's great to see where everybody's coming in from. Just some reminders before we get started. We will take questions sort of at the end. Please drop your questions in the Q&A, not in the chat. Chat tends to get buried. Q&A is much easier to find. And at the end of the webinar, we'll provide you with some links and some information about upcoming events. With that, I will hand it over to Victoria.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Jen. And it is great to see so many of you. Thanks for signing in and giving us a little bit of your time today. I think it's going to be a really exciting conversation. I always learn so much with both Jen and Clancy, so I'm very excited to introduce her as well. Clancy Harrison is a registered dietitian and TEDx speaker. She also speaks internationally, and she's an author. She challenges the way food insecurity is approached in the US. Her mission is to demolish the stigma around healthy food access which places her on the cutting edge of advocacy. She is a really wonderful friend and has done some amazing work in this space. And so we're so honored to have her today. We're going to dive right in. Clancy, thanks for coming.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to always work with you as well.
So, we're going to start just kind of talking a little bit more about the food dignity movement. How did you tell us more about that movement? How did you get involved in that? We both share a lot of stories around starting in healthcare and really understanding sort of all about food, and then really having our eyes sort of open to a whole nother world. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, well, thank you for asking. First of all, I am a registered dietitian and I started volunteering almost 15 years ago at my local food pantry. And prior to volunteering, actually into the decision phase, if I was going to be the president of that food pantry, I had a lot of misconceptions start bubbling up. I didn't realize that they were misconceptions at that time. And so just for example, I assumed that maybe people would be uneducated, maybe they would be lazy. And keep in mind, this is all coming from my personal lived experience. It's also my bubble of privilege, and everything that has occurred in my life has had me have those viewpoints. And then I listened to the good voice that was like, Clancy, it's not your place to judge. Just go in and volunteer. You're a food service director for years. You know how to get food. You know how to give food. You love helping people. And so I listened to that voice and I went in, and it was at that moment I realized not only but my professional life, but my personal life was turned right side up. And everything that I thought was true was really stories that I was creating in my head. There were a lot of misconceptions, a lot of projections, a lot of assumptions about what I thought hunger and poverty were. And so the last 15 years, I have to tell you, it's been a growth to the point that we started something called the food dignity movement. And we don't necessarily have a definition of food dignity because we do believe that food dignity could be defined differently by every single person in this world. And more importantly, that definition can change across someone's life cycle, across their lifespan, depending on what they're dealing with or what they're not dealing with. But I can tell you that the food dignity movement has a very strong foundation of empowerment. And there's different levels of empowerment. The first one is empowering ourselves to say we don't know everything. And that's probably one of the hardest empowerments to do because so many times we want to be right. But if we can take a step back, I'm a registered dietitian. So I like to say that I put my degree and my credentials in a box and I lock it up and I walk away. And when I work with people, I always say, what is my lesson today? Just because I'm an expert in food and nutrition does not necessarily mean I'm an expert in someone's life. And I need to be humble enough to say, I don't have all those answers. I don't know the problem. And I definitely don't know the solution to the problem I do not know. And so once we can get past that, then we can start empowering other people, whether that's our employees, or the people that we're serving at a food pantry or rescuing food for, but also our patients, our clients, whoever it is that we're working with. How do we empower them to say what is working for them? What do they need? What are their specific barriers to food access that we don't fully understand? What is the solution that lives in their heart, their minds, their souls? And how do we uncover that information? And then I'm going to say the last part of empowering is empowering other organizations. Instead of looking at them as competitors, look at them as collaborative partnerships. And how do we make other nonprofits stronger? How do we make other professionals stronger? By resource sharing, by sharing information, maybe even funding. And so that way we can all be stronger together. And once we can start that empowerment process, it's going to take a lot of internal reflections, a lot of internal dialogue, but that creates that strategic communication that we need to create action. And that's really the bottom line of food dignity. I know that was a long-winded answer, but I think it's just really important that it's about leveling inclusion, starting with ourselves and then on to the people that we're working with.
Thank you so much for that. I mean, so much of what you said resonates. There's so many things that I think we can enter the space with, and really being able to let that go, and open our possibilities to just kind of learn a little bit more. It brings up a great point though, because really being open to understanding what's happening in these systems and larger situations that are sort of circling all of this hunger relief work. What is your experience in really seeing the current state of hunger relief, and in reflection to where you really want to see this move? Because of course we've
Right.
all kind of had experiences with this, but I'd love to hear yours.
Sure. If you want to move the slide forward, I- this is a loaded question. I have three takeaways, and I think each takeaway could have its own half day, not even probably its own book, quite frankly. And so I appreciate you asking. I think the first one is definitely about collaboration. I think there's a lack of collaboration in hunger relief. And so I'm going to give you maybe some examples. Maybe a nonprofit doesn't want to work with another nonprofit because there is money in hunger, there's money in poverty. And so as long as we're set up to compete for funding, and there's turf wars and funding wars, hunger is always going to win. It's not until we collaborate and join forces that maybe, just maybe, we can start making a dent and have more food equity and food dignity. The other thing I've noticed is there's a lot of organizations or people that could be ego driven in this work. And so it could be about getting the award. It could be about, again, getting that funding, getting the attention, getting the media, versus making it about the people that we are serving, the people that we're working with. At the end of the day, I always say my boss is the homeless veteran that's been 19 years in recovery from substance abuse. And as long as he's having food inequity, he's my boss. And once he has food equity, I'm just going to keep moving on to someone else. And so how do we make it about the people that we're serving versus about us or our organizations? And then the other piece with collaboration that I feel is that our food pantries. I ran a food pantry. Just a disclosure, a lot of my lens comes from being on the ground with direct service, running a food pantry under the Feeding America Network. And so what I learned very quickly is that I think that people don't understand the definition between food bank and a food pantry. I think sometimes people think food pantries are food banks. And so a lot of money, whether we're talking about federal dollars, state dollars, local dollars, but then if we get into corporate partnerships, if we're getting into foundations, they go to our bigger food banking system where the resources are not necessarily trickled down. Yes, we might get food as a food pantry, but we are not necessarily getting the financial resources. We are expected to be volunteers, and we are expected to make things work when it might not be working, especially during a pandemic or supply chain issues. And so I think what's really important is that we start to shift some focus and collaborate with food pantries, the people who have to say, I'm sorry, we ran out of food today. And if we can focus on our food pantries a little bit more and have them apply for funding and teach them how to apply for funding and elevate their voice through collaboration, I think we could see some major shifts and changes. So that's the first one. The second one is I think there's a lack of accountability in the hunger relief sector. For many years and counting, we boil our work down to pounds of food, number of meals served, versus making it about the people that we're serving. So for example, let's just say our food pantry received 100 pounds of carrots, right? To make that into meals, number wise, a value, we just multiply pounds by 1.2. That gives us 120 meals of carrots. But do carrots actually make up a meal? And you might say, well, Clancy, there's other things available at the food pantry. Yes, that's true. But with my experience in ordering, we're not always getting food that can create a meal for the person. And we're not always getting food that is culturally relevant or appropriate for religious practice or whatever that person needs. Maybe even their likes or dislikes, maybe their allergies or their medical condition. Maybe they have IBS. So if we're not talking to the people about what they need and what they want, how are we meeting them where we are? And then with reporting wise, with accountability, just because we're providing food, so let's just say there's a school and that school has 2,000 students and we have a food pantry on site at that school, that means there's access to that food, but just having access does not necessarily equal participation. And then let's take it a step further. If a child or someone even participates at our food pantry and they take food home, that does not necessarily equal consumption. However, we're reporting numbers that if people have access to it, then we're ending hunger with those numbers. So it's skewing our data, and it's actually, I think, hurting hunger relief efforts because we're not seeing the full picture. And I think if we can make it more about what people need and centering our evaluation a little bit more strategic on how we're changing and improving lives of the people we're serving, then we know that we're making an impact. And then the third one is, which you can switch the slide, in hunger relief, we focus on one pillar of sustainability, and that's going to be economic. Now, I have to say, any food rescue, you're taking in a second pillar. You're not only talking about economics, but environmental, right? Because you're rescuing food. But there's a third one, it's social and cultural. So many times when we think about sustainability, we're thinking about sustainability from the lens of let's get rid of plastic bottles. But sustainability, we have to focus on what the person needs. We have to make them stronger based off of what success looks like for them. And so many times, and I'm guilty of it, all of these things that I'm talking about, I am 100% guilty of it. These have been everything I'm explaining is what I've learned in the process and why we started the food dignity movement, because that's why we started it, so we could be more aligned. But many times we might assume a problem, and then we create a solution based off of that assumption. And so what we really need to do is uncover what the true problem is that we're trying to serve that day, instead of saying, here's a box of macaroni and cheese. Good luck with cooking it. I hope you can find the milk to actually complete that portion of the meal. Instead, can we sit down? Can we start having conversations and lead with what success looks like? And I want to just give a quick example of how I really messed up. I was running a food pantry during COVID. We got the farm produce boxes, farm to food pantry, farm to home produce boxes. And I was giving them out without really talking to our clients. And it was an off day. A veteran came in who I knew very well, for many years served him. And he's like, Clancy, I can't eat the produce in this box. And I said, well, why? Let's have a conversation. He said, I'm homeless. And I said, okay, why don't I'll take the cabbage, I'll take the sweet potatoes, the carrots, you name it, but you can keep the apples. And he said to me, Clancy, I can't eat the apples. I don't have teeth. What did you do with my applesauce? So here I was assuming a problem, assuming a solution without including him. And I think if we can really look at hunger relief from the lens of how do we collaborate? How do we empower people and other organizations? How do we have accountability and transparency with our numbers and what we're reporting in our evaluation process? And then finally, how are we looking at the whole person, our whole program, from the sustainable development goals, and really focus on economy, environment, and certainly that social culture? So that was my 3 things, and that was a lot. And there's more, Victoria, but I'm not going to bore you with that. But I would say those are my top 3.
Those are in no way, in any shape or form, boring, for sure. I think that from both the reactions of those that are joining, as well as just our own experience, we can resonate with so much of that. And I think those are really important things to explore more deeply. I also, I'm already starting to see some things come into the question and answer, really around, actionable steps. And I'm wondering, what are your thoughts as far as, something that would be really manageable sort of next step for many of those that are in this webinar to be able to take away with them and really start applying the food dignity model?
So I think one thing we need to start doing, and can I give a fourth thing before I go into this?
Yes, please do.
And I was nervous sharing this because I think this is a tough one to call out, but I have seen institutional racism in the hunger relief sector. And so if there's one thing that we need to change, and I have four things, but I think if we can focus on the people that we're serving and who needs food, and really focus on how are we how are we creating an equitable food supply? Why do we have to keep saying we're fighting hunger? Why can't we just stop saying that? Because at the end of the day, we all need nourishing food, every single one of us. And that's what I love about, Food Rescue Hero. You're talking about rescuing food. We can make rescuing food less about hunger, but more about the environmental aspect. We can make it more about coming together. And I think when we can change that narrative and start asking where the barriers are and truly understanding and centering that person, then we can get into the food equity and the institutional food racism that's existing. I've recently have had two organizations in the last 2 weeks reach out to me and say, one is black facing and the other one is Dominican, and they're not getting food from their food bank. And that is because of, and I know this food bank really well. We also have a white facing population, a big mobile food drive who's getting all kinds of food. So you can call it whatever you want, but why do we have different member agencies under one food bank getting different types of food? And so we need to start having these difficult conversations. We need to start centering people around food equity, not necessarily hunger at this point, because I think if we can get into the food equity lens more and focus on that, then we could start chipping away at our problems within the food relief. I think the second thing is going to be going back to that empowerment. How do we empower ourselves? How can we be humble enough to say, where am I wrong so I can be right? Am I creating the barriers to food access? And I can tell you, as someone who's not only 15 years on the grounds, but 27 entire professional years in some capacity or another fighting hunger, whether it was a food service director or I was working with Penn State Cooperative Extension, there were times that I never asked the right questions and I had a lot of assumptions. And so how do we go back to saying, where am I wrong so I can be right? What is my lesson today? I don't know everything. And how do I not assume the problem, but empower that person that we're working with? And then the third one here, I'm going to say evaluation, right? So you're probably thinking, well, if we're not counting pounds of food and number of meals, what do we evaluate? And if we can work with our evaluators, I highly recommend, if you don't have an evaluator, get an evaluator. Start looking at how you're improving people's life. Are you decreasing food stress? Are you increasing food access confidence levels? Are people feeling comfortable coming to you for help? How are you improving their lives? We talk so much to the people that we're serving. We do now what we call take what you can, take what you need, pay what you can, produce stand. And we work with our local farmers and we invest our money back into these local farmers. And I had a lady who's been picking up for a gentleman, an elderly man who's been in isolation because he can't leave his house. He's literally tied to a big oxygen tank. He doesn't have a smaller one and he can't work. And she said, because of our produce, he's had more color in his face. He has a spring in his step. He has like a sing in his voice. He's happier. He's healthier. But what we're doing is we're asking her, what does he want to eat? Right? Such a simple question that is often overlooked. And I've had people say, well, we can't ask that question. What if we can't source it? But the dignity in just asking that question, what do you want to eat, can take your partnerships to a completely different level. And then you have a growing list of what you should try to be sourcing. And then the last one, outside of evaluation, I'm going to say is leaning into the fact that we have to have self-compassion. If we're going to be humble and we're going to say where we're wrong, then how can we start talking more about it's okay to not know everything and we're not supposed to know everything. And we're on this learning journey together. And so I would say those are my top things, but I'm sure we have a lot of questions. I feel like I've just been talking and giving you a lot of stuff, Victoria.
Try to find my unmute. I was scribbling notes the whole time. It is
Yeah.
all so exciting and interesting to listen to you talk, Clancy. I think that this is a conversation that is it's not talked about enough, right? We don't have these conversations enough. And I say that because there's one question in the Q&A. And I think that's because a lot of folks are probably like me and they're sitting here going,
It's a lot of information. I
I need
dumped a
to
lot.
think about this. I need to think about this. There's new things here. I can't even formulate a question around some of these ideas because it's just it's a perspective shift. But the question that was asked is there a system or report that will show data to keep our local food banks accountable and distributing balanced meals and not just pounds of food?
That's what we need to change. I would love to know that answer. That is something I'm actually working with a group of people to create a national coalition around food truth. It's a food truth collaborative. And how do we start holding people accountable? And what are the questions that we need to bring to the table for researchers? Right now, I'm working with multiple universities on creating capstones and research questions around where the gaps are. I always say I have the toddler view of hunger. I can look up from on the ground and I see all the cracks, all the holes, all the gum, all the dirt and grit that's at the bottom of a table where people who might be looking down, whether that's a policy leader, a government official, a foundation, a corporate partnership, or maybe even a hunger relief executives, they look down and they see a shiny table because it's a great question. But I think it's going to take all of us speaking up and holding people accountable. I can tell you, as someone who was under a food bank for many years, I had my hand slapped if I went after funding. I was told by 3 different people that I'm not allowed to go after funding because it was their funding. But yet, as someone who I need refrigeration, I need trash removal. There's all these things that we need when we're running an organization. So yeah, if anyone, I would love for people to put in the chat if they have any ideas, or if you want to take this a step further and talk to me after, it's Clancy at clancyharrison.com. Please email me, because I think the more we come together and speak up, the better everything's going to be. And I do want to point out that in New York, they actually have a coalition of member agencies that are coming together and having these conversations. And we did something in Mississippi, a coalition of member agencies coming together to resource share, to how do we grant write that's not about hunger, but that differentiates ourselves so we can have that funding and we have a different evaluation, and it's not just about pounds and meals served.
Yeah, I want to jump in here. Because we do have another question. And I'm going to mention this later, but we are hosting a conference in October where we will be talking about a lot of these ideas. And there is a session that I wanted to bring up about how do we analyze our programs, the impact of our programs, and getting beyond the pounds. That's something that 412 Food Rescue has done a lot of, and I know some other organizations have as well, where we really dig in and worked with academic researchers to take a look at our impact and find out, where the holes are. So there will be a session on that, which I think is a really interesting topic. The person who asked that question also mentioned that their organization did a countywide food insecurity assessment and wanted to bring up that nutrition security has to be addressed as well. And I know this is Victoria's favorite topic. And that's so true, is that when we talk about impact in pounds of food, what is the food that is being distributed and how can we help people achieve nutrition security?
Very important.
So there's another question here. How do we implement these ideas from a food pantry perspective, specifically on a college campus?
Can you repeat that? I'm sorry, I was reading in the chat. Don't get mad at me.
No worries. I do that.
I'm not reading.
How do we implement these ideas from a food pantry perspective, so specifically on a college campus?
Yeah, great question. I love working with college campuses too. We make it about saving the environment. So if I were going to do a workshop and I was going to teach you, what I would say to you is speak the values of the organization you want to partner with. So if I wanted to collaborate with a university, first of all, I would be talking about retention rates with students. How does food impact retention rates, right? So those would be big conversations, high level conversations with the executive to get the buy-in. If I'm getting the buy-in from the students, I'm going to speak to their values. And one exercise that we did with career and technology, it's high school, otherwise known as VOTEC locally, is we wrote down everything that we thought, again, it's an assumption, everything that we thought that those students would value. And one of the big things was sustainability of the environment, right? And so how do we go in, and we knew we wanted to go in and set up a food pantry, but we didn't go in saying, you're hungry, we're going to save you, we're going to help you, we know all the problems and we have all the solutions. We didn't do that. We went in and said, what if I was to rescue a pallet of macaroni and cheese that a big box store is refusing because 2 cases happen to be damaged, but the rest is completely fine? What would happen if we brought that to your school? And when we posed the question with them being the leaders, with them being the experts, with them caring about sustainability, then their compassion, which we knew that they had compassion, then their compassion started saying, they're the ones that's talked about hunger. They brought it up. They started talking about dumpster diving. They started talking about how friends don't have access to meals. Now, in my mind, I knew what days, what times, and where that food pantry was going to be. Because we centered them as leaders, they took control. They ran it. They are running it now. I'm delivering food on Thursday from a Midwest food bank, which is in Harrisburg, to them. But where their time, their date, what they call it, everything was completely different than what I assumed would be the answer. So the number one thing I would say in any situation is always speak the values of the people that you want to partner with or you want to elevate or empower. So many times we go in saying, oh my gosh, I'm rescuing food, or oh my gosh, I'm, fighting hunger. Yes, people care about that, but they're going to care more about their outcomes and their missions, their strategic goals. And so we can always connect food to any strategic goal there is, because we all need nourishing food. Again, it doesn't have to be about hunger. All it has to do is be about that we all need food. And guess what? Most Americans don't eat enough fruits and vegetables to begin with. So that's all we have to say. And especially if we're working with a population that we know is at a high risk, like I always say, how many times do we have to ask someone if they're food insecure before we start helping them? I'm so done asking people. If we know that there's a high population, let's just start making food access, making food as a right. And you probably have other questions, but I want to point out something on this.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
On this slide. So if you look at this slide, you're going to see food insecurity on one side. You're going to see a bridge. That bridge goes to food access and to food as a right. And so as you leave this webinar and then you come to the conference in October, I think 12th and 13th, correct me if I'm wrong. But when you're at that conference and when you're out in the field, and visualize your organization being that bridge. And visualize all of the beams, all of the support, everything that has to hold that bridge down, all the things that have to change. And I can tell you, as someone, I already told you how long I've been fighting hunger, my bridge is still completely up, because we have so much to learn and so much to change and so much to challenge. And we need so much more accountability and collaboration that no one is going to have their bridge completely down. And so what pillars do you need to start putting in place to create that change? And sorry, I get really heated.
Absolutely. I am on the same page. We actually did get another question. And this one I'm going to answer if you don't mind, because it's about food rescue. And I was already thinking about this. As food rescuers, the term sourcing is stressful. How do we flip the script so that we can distribute what we gather to the appropriate community instead of trying to source what certain distributors or pantries need? So this is the age-old question. We're in food rescue, we are gathering what would otherwise be wasted, right? And it's our imperative to keep it out of the landfill. And we want to get that to people, but we don't want to force people to eat it or take it. So one of the things that we started doing when we started food rescue here in Pittsburgh is it was always opt-in. We never told an organization they had to take what we were offering. If we had a pallet of I don't know, half and half, for example, we're not going to insist that somebody take that pallet of half and half. First of all, it's going to end up becoming garbage because nobody is going to be able to distribute a whole pallet of half and half. Second of all, I bet you there's somebody that wants that, right? So we would go down the list and we would call as many organizations as we needed to find somebody to take that. Part of the result of that is that we had to create new access points because the existing pantries just could not handle the volume of fresh food that we were rescuing, right? A lot of the pantries are only open a couple days a week, or they close for 4 days in between. And so they're not going to be able to take all that fresh food. So we started creating partnerships with organizations that were not hunger orgs, but that were serving a population that might need the food. So, for example, we work with housing authorities, the City of Pittsburgh housing authorities, the Allegheny County housing authorities. We work with Head Start programs. We work with veterans programs. We work with LGBTQ organizations. We work with organizations that are serving people who might have a need for that food. In that way, we actually vastly multiplied the number of distribution points that we had to take food. And that kind of answers that need. Like, how do you get rid of that pallet of half and half, or that, I'm trying to think of something, lettuce, it's always lettuce, or that bread, right? How do we get rid of that? It's by creating a much broader network. That also in turn helps create food equity, food justice, food access, nutrition security, because you're putting food within reach of people. You're allowing them to access it where they are without having to go out of their way, without having to make sure that they don't have to work that day, without having to take a bus or a jitney or an Uber, I guess it is now, to pick that food up, and in a very dignified manner, because they're picking it up when they're going about their daily life. They're going to pick up their kids from their Head Start program, they get a bag of groceries, right? They're going home, there's a bag of groceries available in their community room. So that actually solves multiple pain points at once, and is a really, I think, unique feature of food recovery. That's one that I could talk about forever.
I love that.
So true. I was going to just tag on to that, Jen, too, just from a very practical, actionable step. One of the things that really struck me when I helped launch Philly Food Rescue was this idea that 412 had developed this great database, right? Where they actually would make notes of, hey, this group really finds this really helpful. If you bring this here, they love the applesauce because this is a homeless area that, maybe has some struggles around dentition, right? Like those things were being sort of tagged. So I would also say that was something that was really a takeaway for me, was how do we scale this to really understand, one, the nonprofit census was really helpful in being able to get more and more feedback back from partners that we worked with in order to sort of understand who they're serving, what are they needing, do we have like a large gluten-free population or halal population? They might be the first ones to get a pallet of whatever, Rice Krispies. So it's the things that, we start thinking about a little differently, but then we think about what are the systems to put in place to scale them,
Right.
which I think is where I struggle with this, right? Is that like all of the bridge supports and components, some of them work really well in a smaller setting. And when we started to see, oh, wow, when we start applying that in different places, how do you scale some of these ideas? And I think that there are absolute answers to this. It's just, a new way to explore it.
Yep. We do have one more question. I'm from California, so a big topic has been SB 1383. I'm not sure if other states have similar bills, but I think it's going to really affect the way food is rescued and how pantries get food. My question is, are there other bills out there, or is this something that only California is working on at the state level? I can take this. So New York has a similar law. It does not have the teeth that the California law has. I'm hoping that will change. I know that there's a few folks here from New York I saw. If you have insight into that, you can drop it in the chat, whether or not it's being enforced. There are no other current state laws that are in the works that I'm aware of. However, I agree. I think that the SB 1383 is going to change the way that retailers expect donations to happen. They want that same level of service across their brand footprint, not just in California. They're bragging about zero waste. They want it to happen everywhere. And I think we're going to see more and more impact, regardless of whether there are laws. California is such a major market. We're going to see retailers really kind of demanding a new level of service from their food recovery partners. And that's also something we're going to talk about at the conference. All right. Are there any other questions? I don't see any. Oops, that was the Q&A slide. All right. So I just wanted to mention that next month we will not be having a conference. I'm sorry, we will be having a conference. We will not be having a webinar because we will be having the Food Rescue Hero Food Recovery Conference. I will drop the links to register in the chat once I copy and paste them. Karen, I don't know where you sent me those links. I know you sent them to me ahead of time, but here we are. I got it. Okay. We are going to talk about a lot of these topics. Clancy will be leading a discussion about food dignity, as well as a breakout session where you can chat and ask questions about it. It'll be really interactive. We will talk about how to measure your impact. We'll talk about retailers. We're going to be talking about a lot of really pertinent topics that we've kind of touched upon today. So I really hope to see a lot of you at that conference next month. The link to register is in the chat. I just dropped it. No, I didn't. I just dropped the way to contact us. Yes, and the website. Sorry, this is not usually my role. Jake usually does this and I'm usually presenting. So, and that is why. Clancy, do you have any final words for us?
So, I don't know if I have any final words. I know that I get very passionate about this. And I think if anything, and I know I've said it, I think if anything of all of this, we could just start exploring where we're wrong so we can be right. And how can we re-envision hunger? I like to say it's hunger 2.0, and it's food equity, right? And so let's stop fighting hunger and start implementing food equity. I feel very passionate about that right now.
I wrote that down. Stop saying fighting hunger. I love that. Well, I really thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited to continue this conversation in October. I really look forward to a robust participation from folks on this webinar. If you're interested in these topics, please join us, and we will see you in October. All right. Thank you, everyone.
You. Thanks, everyone.
Sharing. All right. Bye.
I don't know. Do you want me to stay on?
We can jump.
Okay. Bye.